let's talk about the plague of pornography for just a minute. Wow. This is one of the biggest issues that so many deal with in these latter days, but few talk about it or even know how to talk about it. And when they do talk about it, it's usually in a private setting with a leader who is expected to know how to navigate struggles with pornography. Thankfully, Leading Saints has put together a remarkable resource called Liberating Saints. It's a virtual library with 25 plus presentations focused on helping leaders be better prepared to help someone overcome struggles with pornography. We cover topics like how to minimize shame in the bishop's office, how to talk with children about pornography, and even how to talk about female pornography use in Relief Society. If you'd like to review the Liberating Saints library at no cost for 14 days, simply go to leadingsaints.org/14. That's leadingsaints.org/14. While you're at it, we'll give you access to all of our virtual libraries that cover several leadership-related topics. So click the link in the show notes or simply visit leadingsaints.org/14. Today I'm in Ogden, Utah with Clay Olsen. How are you, Clay?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. Now, who is Clay Olsen? There's so many. I mean, you are carrying the world on your shoulders, as we talked about before we hit record here. So when people ask you what you do, what do you say?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it depends on the audience I'm speaking to. But first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. And I have 3 beautiful daughters, one on the way. And I have a wonderful, supportive wife. And we just relocated up to northern Utah, up in Cache Valley, and we love it up there. We've been in Salt Lake for over 10 years, and we're up there now. So that's who we are in outside of work, and through work. Yeah, I am very focused on cause initiatives. So I started a nonprofit called Fight the New Drug, which focuses on educating young people on the harmful effects of pornography and other forms of sexual exploitation through science, facts, and personal accounts. Started many other initiatives around that. Everything. I sit on boards for child sexual exploitation and human trafficking. I have a software company that focuses on mental health and addiction recovery and the healing journey. So it's a collage of many initiatives and efforts that all center around trying to help people improve their lives and live life to the fullest, and ultimately, live a life that is true to their core values and who they feel like they are, their true self.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a million different directions we can go with that intro, and let's just start here. Let's say your phone rings and you answer it and somebody says, Clay, I'm a bishop. What typically, when you connect with church leaders, especially bishops, what direction does the conversation usually go?
I mean, for many, many years, it was all centered around pornography and the struggle that bishops are facing, helping their membership around that subject, just due to the fact that, for over a decade, for now 13 years, been working with professionals around the world, neuroscientists, clinicians, therapists, researchers, professors, learning about this subject, religious leaders, and kind of cultivating that and trying to influence a younger generation to live differently than previous generations on the topic. So, for a long time it was that, but as of late, I just spoke last Sunday at a married student ward around mental health and relationships. So I guess those 2 things are probably the 2 topics that we cover.
Nice. So let's just start with pornography. Obviously, every bishop is almost cliche I remember being called as a bishop. That was my first appointment. Someone came in and confessed their struggle with pornography. And I was a young buck and didn't really have much life experience. So I didn't really know what to say to him. So when we talk about pornography, what are some general topics that we sometimes miss as church leaders when it comes to the battle of pornography?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think at the risk of sounding maybe cliche, clearly there are many individuals within church leadership and just the general membership of the LDS Church and society at large that are just completely oblivious to the scope of the challenge that we face. We hear about it in talks and people mention it, but for so many, because it's so secretive and because it's under the surface, for so many, they're just wildly naive to the scope of it. And, if you have, 10 young men in your ward, there's a good chance that you have 10 young men struggling with pornography. And I wish that was an exaggeration. So, that's one thing. But I would say another aspect to this conversation that I think a lot of bishops and leaders miss is that, the solution for so many bishops over the years, when it comes to these challenges is like, all right, in order to overcome this challenge, we need to boost your spirituality. And therefore, let's turn to the scriptures. Let's turn to prayer. Let's turn to fasting. All of which, by the way, let me go on record and saying are fantastic things that members should engage in and youth should engage in when addressing these things. It can only help. However, we miss the mark with behavioral challenges, addiction challenges. We would never do that with a physical illness. We'd never do that with a medical struggle where someone comes and says, I'm dealing with this disease or this, my leg is broken or whatever the physical challenge may be. We would never say, okay, the answer here is to pray. Of course we should pray. And of course we do pray for those that have diseases and challenges of that nature. But we also turn to professionals, medical professionals, to provide the necessary care for our physical bodies. Why then are we so hesitant to turn to professional guidance and support with regarding our behavioral challenges and our mental health challenges? And so that's one thing that I would point to leadership and saying, hey, treat the professionals and or professional services or experts in these fields of behavioral or addiction challenges or mental health challenges as your ally, as you would a medical doctor in respect to how we might support an individual overcoming these issues. I'm all about increasing spirituality and increasing their connection to God, which will ultimately, yield magnificent results. But there is an actual healing journey that needs to happen, and oftentimes that requires kind of some guided support that isn't just, check in with me once a week and see how you did this week, and kind of white knuckle your way through this. And if you have faith, God would take this challenge from you,
or it should become easier, right?
And we all want those kind of beautiful, miraculous experiences where, literally God could and has for many people taken, addiction desires away from them kind of in an instant. They just kind of, rise up from a prayer and it's gone. And for some, that's a reality. And for most and for many, it is a process. And setbacks are part of that process. And perfection, if your standard is perfection out of the gate, you are setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment and ultimately despair. And the role that shame plays in that despair, the literature is really clear on shame perpetuating the negative behaviors rather than supporting behavior change. And so if we can do as much as we can to cultivate an environment and a relationship that really bolsters self-compassion and encouragement and really focuses on the good rather than just fighting the bad and avoiding the bad. If we walk into a dark room, our first reaction isn't to turn off the darkness and all of our attention is to turn off the darkness. Rather, it's to turn on the light.
Right.
And so, looking at that as in our lives and saying, well, what do we need to turn on, or what do we need to activate, or what do we need to focus on? And, the definition of darkness is the absence of light. So it cannot coexist when light is present. And so rather than just fighting the darkness, we need to focus on building the light within us and within our lives and our environments and our spirituality, our connections, which will dissipate the power and seduction of addiction in a beautiful way.
So what would you say to a bishop who maybe reaches out and gets a therapist involved, right? Sends maybe this young father who's struggling with pornography to a therapist, and it's a therapist they found maybe through family services or wherever, and off they goes. Is therapy enough, or just traditional therapy? I mean, what other resources or approaches should we consider when mentoring somebody through struggles with pornography?
So I'm a huge advocate for therapists and for professional intervention. However, I'm also not of the mindset that that is the only path toward healing and recovery. I think that they provide a level of expertise and knowledge and experience and credentials that really have an understanding of this process. But studies have shown that the effectiveness of different modalities are less critical in one's recovery compared to one's connection and relationship with their Sherpa or their guide or their coach or their therapist, whoever that may be. So if that connection is strong, whoever is kind of in their corner supporting them along the way, they have a higher chance than any specific, subscription to a particular modality of therapeutic approach.
Yeah. So someone maybe go to a therapist and that bishop or whomever's looking, say, all right, what did you talk about? What did the therapist say to do? But it may be start with, did you like your therapist? Did you feel like you connected with them? Do you feel like they would be a strong advocate or a resource for you, and making sure that connection's in place before you even worry about what effectiveness of the therapy is?
Yeah. And if it wasn't clear earlier, I also think that it doesn't always have to be therapy, right? There is a number of ways to address one's, behavioral challenges or mental health challenges. And for some, professional intervention is a welcomed and powerful addition to their kind of entourage of support. And for others, that may not be necessary. And there's other methods or resources or tools that can be implemented to support them on that journey that may not require. I just want to look at, when I think about people improving with mental health or overcoming an addiction, it can be such a Mount Everest to them that they just feel like, why even try? I can't even make it 2 days or 3 days. And we need to really focus, rather than the summit, we need to focus on the next right step, just that next right step, and really put attention to that and set small, achievable goals along the journey, and recognize that it's going to take time. It may have taken years to get to the depths of addiction that they now find themselves. It might take years to kind of get to a place where that is no longer a part of their life. Yeah. So recognizing the process and the journey. And so again, therapeutic intervention may play a role, and we just want to meet people where they are and identify kind of how best we can support them along that journey. And for some, that does involve professional support.
And that may require that 1 week the individual has 7 relapses. So the next week when he has 6, you celebrate that he had 6 relapses. Not that we're still behind on the progress. That is progress.
Yeah, and ultimately, addiction and mental health issues really kind of boil down to a discrepancy or deficiency in one of 3 key relationships. Relationship with self, and that might be how we, what we eat, how we treat our bodies, how much sleep we're getting, how we think about ourselves. Relationship with others, that might involve like our connections with our spouse, our past trauma with others in our lives, and our connection with higher power. So those 3 connections or those 3 relationships are critical, and a deficiency in any of those camps can really set us up to be very vulnerable for addictive patterns in our life. Now, here's the beautiful part, though. The scriptures and the prophets have encouraged us to not just know information, but become Christ-like and to become more than we currently are. And the process of becoming Christ-like is the very same process of the healing and recovery journey. It is strengthening those 3 key relationships of self, others, and our higher power and our connection with God. And as we do so, as we work to improve in those areas, even small iterative improvements in those areas, the results are catalytic and profound for individuals overcoming this challenge.
Man, that's insightful. So this concept of others, because typically what happens, I think, in our tradition is somebody who's struggling with pornography comes into the bishop's office, confesses, and then it's like, okay, between me and you, we're going to figure this out. And of course, we'll, work God into the equation, whatnot. And maybe we'll even loop in a therapist, we'll make sure a therapy is. But outside all that, it's like nobody can know about this, whether that's said or not, right? And so I'm curious, what's the role of a quorum or a relief society in the recovery process?
Oh man, I cannot advocate enough for approaching recovery through community. I was invited to attend. I was speaking up in Boise, Idaho, and I was speaking at a conference, and I was invited to attend a meeting the night before the event. And I actually didn't know what the meeting was for. I literally just thought I was kind of like going to sit, like fly on the wall. I was visiting a friend up there, and he just kind of said, hey, come to this meeting. I show up, and about 40 men were coming in, and it was an old seminary building. Well, I guess it was a current seminary building.
But it was an older seminary.
It was an older seminary building, and people were just flooding into this classroom. And I quickly picked up on the fact that this was a recovery group. This was like a
12 steps.
Yeah, 12-step group, right? And for specifically pornography. And I sat and I observed and I watched and I heard people share. And I can tell you, I sat and wept in that meeting because what I saw wasn't a bunch of broken, sad, addicted men. What I saw were captains in the Lord's army, just spiritual giants that had overcome something very challenging or were in the process of overcoming. And the brotherhood and the strength and the unity was palpable. And it, knocked me off my chair almost. I was just kind of like blown away with the spiritual strength in that room. And you could tell just the power that they all received. Some of them had been recovered or had been in recovery and had not struggled with pornography for years. And you think like, okay, you can be done.
Yeah, you've graduated,
you've
right?
done. You're like, move on, right? But they felt such a brotherhood, and now they're like supporting and being kind of a sponsor to others. And anyway, the model of that can produce just magnificent results. So yeah, sometimes it's so whether a therapist is involved, many of those individuals in that room also had therapists they were working with, or that they had a program or an app, something that was like supporting or a companion to their healing journey. But they had each other. And that might have been the most powerful component to their recovery tapestry, is that they had one another. They had someone that they were accountable to, that was in their corner, that if they were feeling weak or vulnerable, they made a call, and the person on the other line knew exactly what they were dealing with and what they were struggling with, and they would kind of be there for them. So the bishop plays an important role in all of this, but the bishop can't be playing the only role in all of this. There are so many resources at our disposal collectively, whether it be professional services, whether it be apps and education and information, whether it be groups that are organized at the stake level to support individuals, or community groups that are available in the area. I just think that there's so much, and bishops need to be more aware of those resources and that education and information, and they need to lean into them more and encourage them more, and not take it all on themselves. I think bishops, when they first get called and they realize, oh, good heavens, a lot more people struggle with this than I was aware of, and this is taking up a good chunk of my time and energy. They need to call upon everyone in this space to support their process.
Yeah, that's so helpful. So, as you especially like fight the new drug that creates some incredible awareness of just the magnitude of this issue, it's so easy to be overwhelmed by it. And it's like, how do I even create space to even hold that or even fight against it and whatnot? And in the context of like church, like there's the cliche like pornography lesson, right? And there's we've all heard it, the platitudes that are stated there. But when you're a leader and you hear the problem, or you witness as a bishop these people filing in your office really struggling with it, it's easy to think, okay, we are going to do the fifth Sunday lessons, and we're going to talk about this and make sure everybody's aware and whatnot. And so you want to sort of build this awareness within your community group. Sometimes it doesn't land well or whatnot. And you've done, I would guess, thousands of assemblies for high schools, for youth groups. So what would you say to that leader who's wants to address this issue in like a public gathering setting? Like, how do you do the pornography lesson in a way that actually makes a difference, or should you even do it?
Oh, I mean, biased here, but I clearly think you should do it. I think a community kind of Fifth Sunday or Fireside is a great platform to do it. If it's the only thing that happens, it may not, have the sustaining effect that you want. But as a part of your efforts in this area, It was great. And I can't even count how many firesides I've done in Fifth Sunday lessons on this topic. And I think that and I've listened to many others, and they are beautiful opportunities to break open or a dialogue in a healthy environment where we reduce shame. We really amplify the beauty of the repenting process and the power of the atonement. And I think it also helps to educate. In what I have done in the past, it really helps to kind of wake people up to the issue and to be more aware of the scientific evidences of its harm. The church has been talking about the harmful effects of pornography for a very long time, but science, even at the time that they began talking about it and became kind of a societal challenge that needed to be addressed, science had not yet at that time caught up with truth, much like back when the word of wisdom the revelation was given to Joseph Smith. Science had not yet caught up with truth on tobacco and smoking. It wasn't until 1938 that Dr. Raymond Pearl was working at Johns Hopkins University, and he did some research that connected the dots between lung cancer and smoking tobacco, and that evidence started to come to light. He died actually before his research came to the surface. Nearly 15 years later, finally, Reader's Digest came out with an article called Cancer by the Carton, which sparked a 40-year debate in our society as to whether or not tobacco was indeed harmful.
Wow, 40 years.
40 years of back and forth. And they got doctors saying, hey, this is good for you. This soothes the nerves. It cleans out the lungs. They really pushed the envelope as far as what they were claiming the research to be saying. And over time, of course, science just kind of caught up with the truth, and then society caught up with the science, and we all now know that tobacco is harmful. Well, we're in that debate today regarding pornography. Science has caught up with truth. There's thousands of studies identifying the scientific harm to individuals, relationships, and society. Society is still catching up with that science, and that's a process. But there's a lot of eye-opening information, particularly with youth, where they don't always respond incredibly well to Sunday school answers on topics of pornography. They, more than any other generation, they want the why. There's actually studies showing that the rising generation trusts very little. They have the least amount of trust for institutions and information than previous generations. But what they do trust is science, is high up on that list. So harnessing the science that favors the position of the LDS Church and the beliefs that we hold, taking that science and coupling it with the values that we hold is kind of a very powerful approach to educating young people. It's kind of like, here's what we believe and here's the why, just like we would with drugs. Here's what we believe. The body is sacred, and we don't want to put anything into our body that will harm our body or disrupt our cognitive capacity to make right choices. Well, here's the why behind pornography, and here's the effects. That combination we have seen in doing this for a very long time now just have a really impactful impact on young people, because they kind of say, okay, I wasn't sure what I believed, or my parents, want me to believe a certain thing. I'm kind of like finding my faith, but this makes sense and there's logic to it, and I can understand it now. So now I have the scientific evidence and my belief system that both validate a position that I now hold. They're not in opposition. They are kind of unified, and now I have a much stronger capacity to then deal with it moving forward.
Yeah. So I can see a lot of church leaders, they're just defaulting to the belief system and approaching it that way, which makes sense logically why you do that, because, hey, we're in a church, it's Sunday.
Well, and also they're largely unaware of what the science has revealed. And parents are no different. Parents, for a long time, they just say, this is what we believe, don't do it because it's wrong, it's bad, it's evil, it's a sin. Yeah,
it's the plague, just avoid it.
Avoid it. But, they're hearing from all other areas of their life that it's fine, it's normal, it's healthy.
Let alone the internal desires and drives that are pushing them towards this, right?
Correct. And there's a lot of cognitive dissonance with that. So, but then they get the research and they realize that historically speaking, we are in a very unique place where this isn't normal. This hasn't always been. This isn't a get with the times kind of a thing. This is something that we've kind of been a guinea pig over the last decade around this topic, and we're now catching up with it. And they can start to rise up and fight for true love and avoid the hollow counterfeit. They can be the champions and the captains to to steer their generation in a new direction. So there's a lot of power in that youthful energy, and we can tap into it. So I know that I kind of steered a little off there. Coming back to the Fifth Sundays and Firesides, I think opening up dialogues and discussions that bring to light some of the why, in addition to the values and the beliefs and the atonement and all that, which is ultimately the most important kind of message we can hear in our hearts. But sometimes through this other approach, we can kind of get there faster for many young people particularly. And because the doors open up and they start to swim right towards the deeper meaning. But I'm very in favor, and we've seen a lot of good that's come of it. Every time we go do a fireside, or I've done a fireside, I always get a message from the bishop shortly after saying, I'm booked up with appointments from my young man, and it's beautiful, and it's like, leading towards repentance and healthier living, and it's ultimately very good. So whether that's through an expert in a specific area, or the individual organizing some thoughts in a lesson, like yes to all of it, yes, engage, open the discussion, make it reduce shame, make it open and not so dark and secretive, and the more open we can be about it and about our own vulnerabilities and struggles, the more human we become to those around us, and the more capable we are to address them.
So speak to me more about this concept of reducing shame, because I think intellectually people hear that like, yes, I want to reduce shame in my ward or quorum or whatever it is, but through the application of that is sometimes hard to carry out. So how do you go about reducing shame or destigmatizing things as you're talking about this topic?
Yeah, so shame is, well, we know more about shame than we've ever known, in part thanks to the wonderful work of Brené Brown and many others that she has referenced in her literature. But we know more about shame than we've ever known, and we know more now just how toxic it is, particularly with regard to individuals attempting to overcome struggles that they're facing. And so not only is it a good message to hear, it's imperative that we bring this into the dialogue. So we get messages, we've received hundreds of thousands, and that's not a made up number, hundreds of thousands of messages from young people around the world over the years. And I cannot tell you just how many use words to describe themselves as they're writing in about like their own struggle, that they are broken, that they are a monster, that they're a pervert, that they are sick, that they are disgusting, that they are, all these words that they use to describe themselves because they hate themselves so much, because they know that their behaviors don't match up with their value system. Mm-hmm. And it really creates just this mounting shame that ultimately is so crippling to their capacity to overcome. I said earlier, there's literature research coming out that shows that shame is more closely associated with perpetuating the problem, the very problem that they're trying to overcome, and pushing them deeper into that cycle of shame and addiction. Whereas guilt, on the other hand, very different. We often kind of put shame and guilt sometimes in the same camp, like they're almost synonymous, and they couldn't be further opposites. One perpetuates the problem, whereas the other, and we've all heard this, and this is a bit cliche, but shame is I am somebody bad, or I am bad as a person, and guilt is I've done something that doesn't align with my values, and but that doesn't change the worth that I hold myself. Very, very different. And guilt, on the other hand, they've studied guilt, and they found that it is closely associated with changing behavior change improvements and improvements in addictive patterns and behaviors over time. So two things that are very different, have very different results in where they can lead us. So then we start to think, well, what's driving the shame? Well, oftentimes what we see is it's not so much others putting the shame onto you, like a bully saying you're a bad person, or why don't you do better, or you know better. I mean, it's sad that those kind of messages still exist, and people do hear that when they come and they open up to a religious leader or a parent. There are times that they do hear very negative and shameful messages,
like with the best intentions that with person
the best
has,
intentions,
right?
But nonetheless something that just really drives that shame home.
Right. Yeah.
Most often, it's actually coming from themselves. So it's nothing that the bishop said. It's nothing that the parents said. It's the perception of what they're saying in their heads or what they're thinking of me, and therefore my value goes down. And so we need to work extra hard as leaders or as parents to help alleviate that shame and let them know that they are not a bad person for struggling with pornography. They are not a bad person for struggling with pornography. I can't say that more directly or clearly. That does not equate bad person, and that they are loved regardless of their behaviors. They are loved by their parent and by their heavenly parents, regardless of their struggle. And to really bring that message home and to really help them realize that, the parents and the bishop, that we're all on their team. We're there to help. We're only there to help and to support and encourage, not to create, limitations and, not let you pass this or do that or engage in, attend this activity based on the fact that you're not worthy. Like the bishop's not there to kind of put barriers up. The bishop is there to love and support and encourage and to cultivate their repentance process. So one is communicating that, and you can do that in formal settings. You can do that in individual settings. Really communicating this love that the Savior has for them and love that they have for that individual, and that they're not a bad person. And it might sound like, of course, they're not a bad person. Like, that doesn't need to be stated, but that's my point, is that it often does need to be stated. It often does need to be communicated to that individual. They need to feel like, as they do when they open up, that they are just met with just unconditional love. And that's what the Savior would be there with them. And they say, I'm struggling with this way. And the Savior would just hug them and say, I love you so much. And it would not be met with like, you knew better. Like, why'd you do that? And it also comes down to like, helping the individual overcome that shame. And there are things that the individual can do to overcome that shame that is so gripping and crippling. And part of it is, I love this analogy, but there's a man by the name of, his last name is Casagrande. He was a filmmaker he was a cameraman for Shark Week.
Oh, wow. Nice.
If you've ever seen Shark Week, Discovery Channel Shark Week, and he was asked what he did, what would he do if a great white was swimming right at him, which is literally my worst nightmare. Like, that just like kill me right then. I'd like put my head right into the mouth and say, okay, let's do this. Let's be over. But no, like, what do you do? And he said, well, you got to do something that kind of is counterintuitive to the great white. And he said, I take the camera and I point it right at the great white and I swim right toward it, which kind of triggers this kind of innate reaction in the shark that says, well, wait a second, hold on. Like, nothing chases me.
Yeah, I'm the predator here.
I'm the predator here. What are you doing? And so it kind of, it causes this kind of, this defense mechanism in the shark, and it swims off and it kind of veers, even though clearly they're the dominant, creature in this situation. They're the ones that kind of veer off because it is something that came at it that was unexpected. So with shame, we encourage people to kind of like face their shame directly and to treat themselves with kindness and look at their shame as a separate thing from themselves and face it and swim right at it, which kind of disarms its power over you. And it kind of, it almost dissipates its control over your psyche. And oftentimes it kind of veers off and you say like, oh my gosh, I do have worth. Like, I'm not a bad person. And I'm not living necessarily in the exact way I want to live. And there's a process to get there. And there's people around me that want to support me. And I can do this. And that, oh man, there's some beautiful momentum and power in that light bulb moment for them. So we encourage people to face their shame head on and learn from it. Oftentimes, shame and addiction at large is a manifestation of some other unmet needs in their lives. Right, there's things that are maybe driving those behaviors that, as we listen and pay attention to and sit with those feelings, we can, rather than smothering them and making them go away, we can learn from them. Just as physical pain helps us kind of learn to avoid those pains and to be aware, emotional pain can also do the same. And so sitting with those feelings of shame or those feelings of pain can really help us understand maybe what needs more attention in our lives than that we're not giving it. Maybe there's some relationship improvements, or maybe it's some self-care aspects of my life that are driving some of these behaviors that I'm maybe not fully aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so helpful that, and this, I love the concept of facing the shame straight on. And it's easy to interpret, as a church leader on the other side of the desk, to interpret their shame as guilt. I'm like, oh, they're like a crying mess here because they feel a lot of guilt. Like, no, actually, it'd be best to default to they're feeling a lot of shame. Like, how could I do this? And they're just overwhelmed by that. And
I've let God down.
Yeah, he's so disappointed me.
I can never get on my knees again. I can never pray to him. I'm not worthy to pray. I'm not worthy to, and that's a really dark place to be. Yeah. A lot of people will I push against this idea of like, in relationships, like, well, I am not worthy of love, and therefore, until I have been sober or clean for a certain period of time. I was once asked in a Q&A session, someone asked like, well, how long do I need to be sober before I can get back into a relationship, or before I can, engage in a romantic companionship? And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to position that question. And maybe that's the wrong way to position that question, because it kind of like suggests that love is contingent upon your perceived worthiness. Like love is conditional according to maybe a certain achievement of worthiness. And that is that mentality is kind of bathing in shame. And it sets you up to feel that shame. Whereas we got to recognize that, like, yeah, you may not be in a position, if you're a single individual looking for companionship, you might not feel ready for a relationship, and that's fair. You might not feel ready, but don't feel, and if you were to engage in a relationship, you ought to be very honest about where you're at, no question. You don't hide some of those challenges that are very relevant to that relationship being founded in honesty and truth and candor. But to kind of think that I'm not worthy of this, and position that with God, I'm not worthy of God. I'm not going to pray or take the sacrament until I've been sober X amount of days or months, and I'm not worthy of his love. I can't talk to him until. I just think that's such a dangerous mentality. It's like, no, you get on your knees more now than ever. You go to the temple if the bishop if you're in a position where you can, you go to the temple, you get on your knees, you attend, you participate, because you need the Spirit more now than ever to really help you feel that worth. Because ultimately, if we could feel what the Savior feels for us, it would blow our minds, the amount of just complete unconditional love that just swarms around us from him. So it is not conditional. Yeah. Why are we conditional with our own love toward us? So I really think that we need to kind of change that thought process and help people feel that they are worthy of love at all times. Their behaviors might need some support and correcting and guidance and some improvements, but they are worthy of love, and God's love is never not there for them. Yeah, no, that's, man, you got the price, the cost of admission right there. That's so helpful. So take me back to like these, as we try and talk about the issues of pornography in the context of church. Like you talk about, you can't just come from a believing perspective with it. It really helps when you bring some science in there and truth that way. But nor do you expect, leaders go out and read all these books and put together a slideshow presentation that has these components. So Fight the New Drug as a resource, like how could a church leader use Fight the New Drug and their many resources in order to help them present this information? Oh yeah. So Fight the New Drug is a 501c3 nonprofit. So like there's a lot of wonderful, powerful, free support. And not just from Fight the New Drug, but from a lot of other organizations, and to lean into those. If you're dealing with children, there's some great books that have been written by a number of different groups and individuals that support the educating of young children on the topic. Fight the New Drug has a lot of different resources, everything from kind of a discussion blueprint on it's kind of choose your own adventure. You can identify who you are and who you're trying to talk to. So I might be a teen trying to talk to my parents, or I might be a parent trying to talk to my teens, or I might be a partner trying to talk to my loved one. And you can kind of identify who you are and who you're trying to talk to. And then it walks you through kind of how to approach the conversation, some ideas on some conversation starters, what to do, what not to do, and kind of to facilitate a healthy discussion. And so that's a powerful resource. So that you can find that at ftnd.org/blueprint. We have a 3-part documentary series that we spent years producing
so good.
and making.
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
awesome. What's the title of it again?
Brain Heart World.
Brain Heart World, that's right.
So Brain Heart World. So there's 3 episodes. Each episode focuses on a different aspect of kind of the 3 pillars of harm. So brain focuses on the neurological effects of pornography, where I went to Germany and interviewed Dr. Simon Kuhn from the Max Planck Institute of Human Development. We went to Japan and interviewed neuroscientists throughout the United States. Episode 2 is focused on the heart, or relationships and connection and love. And episode 3 is on the world and our society and the implications there. So it's a beautiful 3-part documentary series. You can watch one or all 3. It's free. You can encourage people to watch it in their homes. It's actually produced to be able to watch with your families. It's not like a documentary where you watch it about your kids. It's actually more catered for your kids, and it's really beautiful.
And it's very entertaining. So the kids aren't going to get bored. There's
humor and there's fun and there's facts and there's animations, and it's great. And there's a discussion guide that accompanies it that you can actually use in a discussion. So it's a great resource for bishops. And also there's the website. There's a podcast, Consider Before Consuming. And then the website itself just has so much, articles, information. You can go in and type in different things, and things can be pulled up that can help you in preparation for a presentation, information. And of course, we can come out and help as well and speak. And I've done that many times, and we can help facilitate something on your own. So it doesn't, to us, it kind of doesn't matter. Our mission and goal is to just support in the way that they want us to get involved or not involved, and even guidance and consulting, but just we want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
We're advocates of that.
And I think sometimes we use that precious church time to, quote unquote, give a lesson or present this information, when in reality we could use that time for discussion. So getting people to watch the Brain Heart World outside of the church building, or have a youth activity during the week where you watch a segment, and then on Sunday use that as, now let's have a discussion. What did you learn? What stood out? And then just having that discussion will have the natural impact of de-shaming, destigmatizing this concept that way.
Yeah. And I also want to bring up, of course, for those that are struggling, I mean, those are all kind of catered toward the discussion and the dialogue on a larger context. But for an individual struggling, we have a powerful, powerful free resource for youth called Fortify. And I say it originated with Fight the Drug, and we carted off into this other entity now called Impact Suite, which is I'm also running, which is a technology company that focuses on the healing and recovery journey for a number of different issues, one of which being sexual compulsivity or pornography addiction. Fortify has been downloaded by hundreds of thousands of individuals in over 150 countries. It provides learning and education and understanding and kind of a journey of that self-improvement, and in addition to a community of others that are on that same journey to support them and tracking to visualize those improvements. So it's a really powerful companion to that recovery journey, and it's free for young people. So bishops, we're actually, I think I mentioned that we are releasing Fortify for the missionary department of the church. So it's every missionary in the field will now have access to Fortify.
Wow. Just be on their smartphone, right?
It'll just be on their smartphone. Wow. And that was, we worked for years working with family services and others to get that approved. So it's been approved on many different levels within the church. So it's a great resource for bishops to be aware of, again, for a free resource for young people. And there are some like human services that individuals can tap into through that tool that do have a fee, like for therapeutic services and whatnot. But the base is free. And so between all of that, there's a great amount of information and a lot of good resources there. And again, there's so many other great organizations producing things. So I encourage a bishop to kind of go down the rabbit hole, like kind of take some time and just go explore. It'll open your eyes. It'll open, and ultimately your membership's eyes.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about that, just in the context of missionaries. Like, how will missionaries use the Fortify app? Are these for those that maybe have struggled with sexual compulsivity or addiction in the past, or how is it going to be used?
Yeah, that's exactly how it'll be used. So it's going to be available to every missionary, and they'll go through a training, and it'll recommend that this is an option for them, and they those that see the need individually and with in conjunction with their mission president. But even outside of that relationship, they would be able to kind of engage with this tool and get some really powerful support.
So talk to me about accountability in the context of this app, or just in general. Like, is this accountability app, or because I've heard mixed reviews, and I sort of have strong opinions on, because I felt like as a bishop, my role was to be that accountability guy. Like, I became the spiritual parole officer, right? Like, hey, text me every night. Like, let me know if you've slipped up, right? And it just never worked, right? And so I think there's more to accountability. It's important, but like, how is it an accountability app, or what should we understand about it?
No, I mean, at its core, it's not an accountability app. Like, a true accountability app might, be tracking their behaviors online and reporting that to an accountability partner, and then that would a conversation would then ensue. The way that you were describing accountability is a little bit more just like, hey, let's check in on Tuesday, see how you did this week. Or like, text me every morning or every night, tell me how you're doing. And that can be very powerful for some, and that can be really good. It's a little bit involved. It's very involved for the bishop to kind of like follow up and doing that, as doing that ongoing. And it's also maybe missing some pieces, because all it's doing is kind of saying, like, it is adding a layer of like, I'm going to have to check in, and therefore I better be good. But it's kind of missing that's addressing outer change. I look at this as like inner and outer change. Outer change is like, things like, that manifest externally, like, did I or didn't I make my bed? But there's an inner change. Like, I can make my bed, but unless like there has been an inner change that actually drives my desires, like, I want to make my bed. I might make my bed, which is an outer external change that some people someone can observe. But unless I want it and desire it and crave it and pursue it on my own free will, then it's not likely to stick long term. It's like I did something for a time and now I'm back, right? Much like a diet. If a diet is temporary, no interchange occurred. Like, if it's permanent, then interchange occurred. So, Fortify, at its core, is not an accountability app. There is accountability function, so where people can sign up an ally. We call them allies. So that could be a bishop, or that could be a partner, or that could be a
sponsor,
parent, or it could be a sponsor, whoever that is, and they can sign that person up, and they have then access to some of the data, and they could have conversations in that regard. But ultimately, Fortify, really, we get literally daily just so many messages from Fortify users around the world talking about how like it just is supporting this journey and kind of opening their eyes to a process of healing that they were unaware of. And it really looks at getting at the root contributors and again, addressing some of those deficiencies in these three key relationships, and looking at nutrition, health, and sleep, and like, eat, breathe, move, sleep, we often talk about. Whereas if those things are out of balance, your vulnerability to this behavioral struggle increases. So it's not just looking at the behavior and saying, let's get rid of the behavior. Sobriety isn't just the absence of the behavior. It's really kind of living a life that is devoid of even that being a part of your, even on the table to consider.
Not even having a desire to sit, right? Yeah.
So so it really helps help people, educate them on like who they are versus where they are. Yeah, they might be struggling right now, but that's not who they are. And it really helps drive the inner change, not just the outer change. And it really helps. So there's a beautiful, and there's animations. It's all animated videos, and it's really beautiful and it's powerful. And so it's a great companion to that process. I would add it to the arsenal of things that they are involved in, the community that they might be part of in a 12-step group. Add Fortify to this, and it's going to just really improve their capacity.
And to me, it's just one more way to prepare young men and women for missionary service is they're going to encounter this app anyway. So let's get them started early.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. All right. This may be a little random, but as I've done more and more interviews about pornography, addiction, compulsivity, however you want to frame it, I've discovered there's like these two camps of like, some say you should never categorize this as an addiction, and others say, no, actually we need to call it what it is and whatnot. And I've got my own opinions on this, but like, just where do you come at around this concept of addiction and pornography?
Great question. So I would say this. You framed it very well. Like, we often want to put it into a binary conversation of like, is it or isn't it an addiction?
Right.
And think of it from the individual standpoint, like the youth. a 17-year-old boy saying, do I or don't I have an addiction? And it's an important question in their mind because they're thinking, well, if I do have an addiction, all these realities start to, like, all of this baggage is associated with that term. And therefore that term applies to me, and therefore all this baggage applies to me. Mm-hmm. If I don't have an addiction, then none of that applies to me, and therefore I'm good and I'm fine and there's no problem. We need to stop talking about this in terms of do I or don't I have an addiction, like an on-off switch, yes or no. We need to start talking about it like a dimmer switch of it's a spectrum of struggle. And at the top of that is, addiction. And can someone be addicted to pornography? Yes. And I use that term in the literal format. Yes. Do we overuse that term? Yes.
Gotcha.
I get parents reaching out to me saying, my child is addicted to pornography. And I dig a little deeper and I find out that they've seen pornography 4 or 5 times. It's like, okay. Let's have a conversation about this. Or somebody that views pornography once every several months. It's like, I'm addicted. It's like, okay, let's talk about that. Like, is there an impulsivity there? Is there a compulsivity there? For sure. Is there an addiction there? Not by any clinical definition would that be considered as such. Well, I guess the reason why this is important, that we stop framing it as do I or don't I have an addiction, and rather more of a dimmer switch of a spectrum of struggle, is because it cuts both ways. The individual that's viewed pornography a handful of times and they now consider themselves mentally of having an addiction, all that baggage that's associated with that term now applies to them when it really doesn't. And there's a lot of shame that can be associated with that. There's a lot of unnecessary kind of struggle that might of self-worth that might be associated with that. On the other side, someone might say, I don't have an addiction because it's not clinically defined, and therefore they feel like, okay, I'm in the green. When in fact, they're kind of in this kind of yellow-orange zone, right? Where it's like, no, there's some issues here. And the trajectory that you're on is heading toward. And so again, whether or not you possess the title, whether or not the term addiction applies to you or not is, in my mind, somewhat irrelevant. It's like, I don't care. What matters is, where are you in the process? Where are you on the spectrum? And let's work to get you to a more healthy place. And let's work to support you on the journey of improvement, because where you are isn't necessarily a sustainable place or a healthy place, regardless of what term applies to you. So we don't have to go get a clinical diagnosis to say, oh, we should or should not be concerned here. Where are you on the spectrum, right? And not from an official kind of diagnosis perspective, but just from a self-check, like, how am I doing? And is this a problem?
Yeah.
Is this leading me toward strengthening my relationship with my Heavenly Father? Is this improving my relationships with my loved ones? Is this improving my relationship with myself and how I view myself? Or is it hurting in these key relationships and categories? And so I think for bishops and for parents and for us as a society, the term addiction, I fully, based on all of my interviews and research with the literature from Dr. Simon Kuhn to Dr. Voon and Cambridge University and so many others that I've talked to around the world, the term addiction is appropriate, but not for everybody that struggles with pornography.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we miss, we trip up.
I often see it that it's almost like another tool, this label of addiction is a possible tool that you can maybe pick up and use. Because I've interacted with some people who said it wasn't until I could actually define it and put my arms around and say, this is an addiction, now I will go take care of it.
Yes.
Then I could actually make progress. Where others, they say, I just don't use that. It just hasn't helped me to label myself that way.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something really important. And that is that, again, whether or not it actually from a diagnosable clinical perspective applies, some feel empowered by the term. Some, I talked to one individual that served a prison sentence based on some struggles that he had and he acted out in ways that were inappropriate and illegal, and he went to prison. And it all stemmed from his struggle with pornography. In prison, he discovered a program that he was watching and it talked about addiction. And it was like his seat it burst into flames, and he like a light bulb went on, and he was just like, "That's me." And he just, it was this like, for him, it was this profoundly emboldening and kind of relieving moment for him to like recognize that there was a name for his struggle, because he just thought he was really broken and bad and all that shame. But he realized, oh, there's a term. That means that there's a solution. That means that we can work working on it, and I don't have to struggle with this for the rest of my life. And so it's true that some people find a lot of comfort, or at least purpose, in the meaning, and in the term. And I think whatever feels right, go with it. But I do caution, when we're talking at large and to the masses, caution the overuse of the term, especially when we're talking about young people. Yeah. When we talk about 12 and 13-year-olds having an addiction to pornography, I cringe, because it's a rare case that would actually be true. And it probably does more damage in that context than good. Yeah. A 50, 60-year-old man that is struggling and identifies with that and finds empowerment in the term, fantastic. Whether it is accurate or not, fantastic. Yeah. And I wouldn't lose any sleep over using the term if they feel that is empowering to them. Yep. Perfect. Awesome. Man, there's so much we could continue to cover. Maybe there's a future, more of this in your future with me, whether you like it or not, Clay. Anytime. But maybe just quickly give us a review of your work in mental health. Obviously, pornography use can be very much a factor in mental health struggles. But what should we consider on that side of things as a church leader? Yeah, I mean, they're very connected, right? They're very. One that's an individual struggling with pornography often is struggling with their mental health as well. And mental health, really, I stumbled into this world unintentionally. So I own a company called Impact Suite that runs a suite or has created a suite of digital health tech apps that support individuals on this journey of. And Fortify recovery. Being one of those, right? Fortify is one of those. Turn is for substance abuse. Lift is for depression, anxiety. Climb is for self-improvement. So, these apps that focus on these. And so, here's our mission at Impact Suite. The larger narrative around mental health is that, have you ever heard this? Like, people talk about, like, we asked this one woman and she said, "Hey, what is depression?" And she's like, "Well, it's this glitch in my brain that doesn't produce the chemicals that allow me to be happby." You heard that? Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. We hear that a lot. We hear that it's just kind of this chemical imbalance, and like you were born with a bad deal brain, and this is your life, and the best we can now do or hope for is just to manage and cope and to improve to the best of our abilities your situation. But this will be a life sentence, and that's, I mean, I'm not making this up. That is the dominant narrative around mental health for most people. And it's so depressing. It's such a depressing story we tell about depression that many give up. Many just say, what's the use? What's the use? And that happened. That has happened for many. That even happened with my own family members who at a young age were told that this was going to be a life sentence, and we can do our best to manage and cope with it. And they just said, "No, I can't do that." And so this is a plague. I mean, if we look at, if we had a screen, I could show you, and your listeners could see this. But ultimately, what we're seeing now in the realm of mental health, I know that the buzz is that this is a challenge that we've never seen before. This is like a big problem. I can't overstate that. If you break down the numbers from age cohort, meaning like, individuals 60 years and above, individuals, 40 and 50 years, all the way down to like 18 to 29, and broke it up into different age cohorts, you would see that individuals and the younger generations are dealing with this at unprecedented levels. A recent study showed in 2020 that 57% of young kids ages 18 to 29, so I guess not so much kids, but young adults, 18 to 29, were dealing with major depressive disorder. 57%. Wow. That is dramatically higher than previous generations. So the trajectory of harm that we're facing is daunting, to say the least. Yeah. And so we got to think of like, okay, well, we've spent more money in mental health in recent decades than ever before. There's more therapists per capita than any other time in human history. And antidepressants are up 500% in the last decade. But yet
it keeps going up.
It keeps going up. So we need to step back and say, well, what is going on? And I believe that there's a better way. And there's a lot of evidence toward this. And I won't go into all this. This isn't the intention of this episode. But within the realm of mental health, there's been this belief that it's kind of like it's part of the human genome. It's part of like you were born this way with this struggle. Now, I'm not discounting genetic predispositions, and that does play a role. But what we have discounted, and at a costly level, what we have discounted is the role that our lifestyles and environments have played in our collective mental health. It's led researchers from Clark University and the University of Washington to describe the increase of depressed individuals to a depressogenic society. They refer to it as a depressogenic society, meaning a society that sets its members up to struggle in these areas. Basically, that we're bathing in these risk factors. We're bathing in these struggles that are perpetuating the very challenges that we are facing today. So it's no wonder. In fact, a man by the name of Edward Schieffelin, many years ago, he wanted to kind of test this theory, and he went to a tribe in the northern region of Papua New Guinea, and he actually studied this group, and he wanted to he interviewed 2,000 members, and he wanted to see, is depression as common or prevalent in this tribe that's largely disconnected from modern civilization, modern lifestyle conditions, Western way of living. And he wanted to see, is depression just as prevalent there as it is with the way we live? And if so, then it would be maybe part of the human genome, something that's kind of genetically passed on regardless of environmental conditions. And what he found is that only one person in over 2,000 interviews came even close to meeting diagnostic criteria for depression.
Wow.
They later did more research and found that tribes in Brazil and even the Amish here in the United States, where they were looking at tribes or groups of people that were largely disconnected from modern ways of living, all of which had the same results, which led them to recognize that depression and addiction are largely diseases of civilization, diseases of lifestyle, and are not necessarily part of our genetic makeup as much as we previously believed, but they are expressions of our conditions that we find ourselves in.
Wow.
So what does that tell us? That should be, and what we now know about neuroplasticity and how the brain changes based off of experiences, and it happens throughout our entire lives, that our brains are constantly evolving based on those experiences. What that teaches us is that this should be really exciting news to those that have been told that this is a lifelong sentence, because it means that there are actually things that we can do, small iterative adjustments in our lifestyles, in our relationships with self, relationship with others, and relationship with higher power that can catalytically improve our capacity to handle these challenges or reduce our vulnerability in these areas. Studies from the University of Kansas have found, one researcher by the name of Dr. Stephen Alardi, who wrote The Depression Cure, he said that we were never designed for the sedentary, indoor, sleep-deprived, fast food-laden, frenetic pace of modern life. And it was like, oh, that's so beautiful. It's like, yes, we would it's no wonder that we have an epidemic of mental health in our society, because we have positioned ourselves to be struggling. But here's the good news. So you could say, well, then what's the point? Because I live in this world, and I'm not leaving this world.
I can't move to Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, I'm not going to move to the mountains and become, so that can be depressing. But the reality is it's very exciting, because as individuals, and this research is very clear, thousands of studies have identified this, as we look at making those small iterative lifestyle improvements in those three relationship categories that I discussed, broadly speaking, but then if you drill in and say, okay, how am I doing with my exercise and my sleep and my past trauma and my mindfulness and my, relationship with others and my time management, my financial management, all of these things contribute and are risk factors and vulnerability factors for one's struggle. So as we make small improvements in these areas, especially the ones that we're struggling in, the results have been just astounding and so exciting.
Wow.
They're not linear. That's what's cool, is that the studies have shown, and even on our own data, it's not a brick by brick linear improvement. As you make small improvements, the effect on your mental health starts to become as I've mentioned, catalytic, and it really starts to kind of compound and improve in a more of a hockey stick fashion rather than a linear slope or plane. Which again, this needs to be shouted from the rooftops on this epidemic that we're facing. And so we've dedicated some energy into producing content, but also resources where we can hold their hand through that journey of healing improvement in the mental health space, but also in the addiction recovery space. And that's what those tools do.
Nice. And so this, obviously, therapy, having a therapist might be a good resource. Reading some books is another resource.
Fantastic.
But, working in some of these apps and being aware of them, as maybe a bishop or a Relief Society president is facing somebody really struggling with their mental health, and you almost wish you could just give them a pill and you're happy now, right? Good. Yeah. All right, move on. Thanks for coming. Right.
And medication plays its role, but we rely on it too much as a society as a long-term crutch. But
so they could maybe point them towards this Lyft app or other apps that you have and say, hey, why don't you give this a try? It's worth, what else have you tried? At least you could try this, right? Yeah. And they may find some encouragement in that will improve their life.
Yeah. We believe that. We've seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. You got the numbers.
We got the numbers.
Man, Clay, we gotta do this again. It's always fun to learn from you and pick your brain. Anywhere else you would send people, and we'll link to all this in the show notes or whatnot, but you have Fight the New Drug, you have Impact Suite of apps and whatnot, Lyft, Fortify, and all these things. Anywhere else you'd send them?
Oh, I mean, through those two URLs, I'm sure they can find quite a bit. And so, cool. I would just say to bishops, to stake presidents, to any leader who's listening to this in the church, I'm just so profoundly grateful for the service that the leaders of the church are providing for no compensation other than hopefully on the other side, right? It's so beautiful, and you guys, doing such a fantastic job of sharing that love to the members of the world. Nice. And we need it more today than we've ever needed it. Yeah. There are challenges ahead of us that are going to need us to link arms together and rise up. And I believe that.
All right. Last question I have for you.
Okay.
Because you're like my kindred spirit, man. Like, here we are. Like, we didn't pick these careers. Like, God said, put us on these paths and said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be in the nonprofit space, and good luck, Yeah. And it's just been remarkable to have these missions and whatnot. And so in your own right, like, you've been a leader in this space. I mean, you've done things and gone places that maybe most people wouldn't consider. So in this leadership role that you've had throughout your career and in these spaces, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
Well, okay. That's a great question.
Boom. There it is.
I would say that being a leader, and I'm assuming others could relate to this. Maybe I'm the only one, but being a leader exposes a lot of my inadequacies. And it makes me realize just how reliant I am on the Savior. I look back at what I've accomplished or what I've done, and without Him at the center or His help or involvement, none of it would have happened, right? And I'm so grateful for ultimately His support. And so attempting or striving to become more Christ-like has been critical in my leadership journey, because I realize just how weak I am. And if He's not behind me, I don't stand very tall. So that's not to minimize individuals' worth. That wasn't the intention of that comment, but rather to say how much we need His support in our leadership. And so, I guess as I look at the type of leader He was and what He accomplished in a very short ministry here on earth, I can find a lot of inspiration for what I attempt to do and strive to do. And I don't always do it the way I want to do it, but I'm so grateful for His example.
That concludes this episode of the Leading Saints podcast. We'd love to hear from you about your questions or thoughts or comments. You can either leave a comment on the post related to this episode at leadingsaints.org, or go to leadingsaints.org/contact and send us your perspective or questions. If there's other episodes or topics you'd like to hear on the Leading Saints podcast, go to leadingsaints.org/contact and share with us the information there. And we would love for you to share this with any individual you think this would apply to, especially maybe individuals in your ward council or other leaders that you may know who would really appreciate the perspectives that we discussed. And remember, go to leadingsaints.org/14 to access our full Liberating Saints virtual library.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness, the loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.